Hey guys, welcome back, it's Meg. If you're new to Mistweaver or thinking about picking it up, here are some things to keep in mind as you're learning the spec. Unfortunately, there isn't really an easy way to get introduced to the spec with no baseline knowledge, so I would recommend watching my Mythic Plus guide first, which goes over all of the major spells and abilities that we use, as well as having your talents open in-game or in the Wowhead talent calculator, just for easy reference while watching. You may also want to revisit the video once you've become familiar with the names or as you encounter issues while playing. I am basing this video mostly off of common questions that we get or common mistakes that we see while doing reviews, so I tried to do this in an order that would make sense to new monks, but of course feel free to ask questions as you need. Starting out with the importance of positioning, melee uptime is a core part of any Mistweavers kit, so to give you a quick idea of how important it is, the highlighted spells all require melee range or close to it. This includes our kick, an AoE stun, and our primary healing cooldown, which is Chi-Ji. So these things are very important, but they are still cooldowns. But our damage rotation is also entirely melee based and provides maintenance healing. These two spells can be used from outside of melee range, but are on about a 30-second cooldown each. Everything else is either utility, a defensive which doesn't have a range requirement, or a heal, which is the standard healing spell range of 40 yards. One of Mistweaver's strengths is that while being able to heal efficiently in melee, we do have the freedom to float out if melee becomes too dangerous, or we need to make sure that our cast is not going to get interrupted. Jade Empowerment with Crackling Jade Lightning is our best heal from range when we have multiple targets, in addition to having things like Shaylin's Gift, Vivify with Vivify Cleave to support us until we can get back into melee. This can burn your mana, but we do have excellent mana currently, so this isn't so much of a problem. But with our kit working this way, we can plan around melee downtime, whether it's boss intermission, area denial mechanics, we should be able to play around nearly anything in terms of positioning. And this is part of using your entire kit. So again, this is using everything to do damage to heal, and your utility to make healing checks even easier. It's always better to prevent the damage than it is to heal it back, and Mistweaver has a ton of crowd control at our disposal. This also includes healing spells, so with current tuning, we're never going to be DPSing 100% of the time for Ancient Teachings, nor will we be casting 100% of the time and not doing damage ever. There is always a mixture of things, specifically with Mistweaver, especially right now, between our casted spells, our melee abilities and our damaging abilities, and our damage to healing conversion. Mistweaver is an excellent example of a well-rounded spec, and when you try to only use half of the kit, you're making things harder than they need to be. Part of this is getting way too hung up on the terminology that's used. There's a lot of words that get tossed around attempting to describe a playstyle for Mistweaver that don't really exist anymore. There's fist weaving, mistweaving, cast weaving, Sith weaving's a new one. So these are all super misleading in an attempt to describe the playstyle, but there isn't a real definition for these, so players often end up confused, both new and veteran players. And then that leads us into avoiding traps. Something I've seen a lot lately is that desire to classify Mistweaver with one of the terms that I mentioned previously, and this is usually a good indicator that someone doesn't really know what they're talking about. That also includes things like a ranged Mistweaver, as we can never be ranged when it comes to our classification for mechanics, and the fact that we do most of our damage and utility from melee. Anything that would encourage you to only use a portion of your abilities while claiming that it's overpowered or better than this other thing is kind of just setting you up for failure and is usually incorrect most of the time. Other bad generalizations or advice would be things like always using certain abilities in specific orders or always using certain spells in every situation. Mistweaver is an extremely flexible spec and has maybe one or two legitimate truths to the spec, but outside of that you have so much freedom to figure out different ways to handle different situations. The big ones that I've seen lately are always keeping Enveloping Mist on your tank. You really don't need to do this, especially with how self-sustaining tanks are, and most of your casted healing will go to your DPS, most of your maintenance healing will go to maintain your tank. Another common one is always using Thunder Focus Tea with Rising Sun Kick. Again, Thunder Focus Tea is very versatile, and preventing a variety of use is not going to serve you well in the long run. So if someone is seriously recommending this, I would be wary of their content in general. Both of these often show up in the form of macros. One that I've seen recommended a lot is a spell sequence or a cast sequence macro. Similar to Thunder Focus T, the issue with that is that our rotational DPS buttons are tied to our healing and one of our major cooldowns. You don't want to be restricted to the same exact rotation over and over. There's variance in our rotation depending on the damage intake, depending on our damage pattern, the mob count, the cooldowns that we have or don't have. And then in the same breath, we have falling into the bucket of Thunder Focus T. There are Thunder Focus T macros that will use the same ability each time. I don't recommend these at all due to the issue with removing the flexibility and the majority of the use as a result. For our builds, if you're entirely new to Mistweaver, then it might be surprising to learn that Raid and Mythic Plus play like almost two entirely different specs, and it is important to know the difference between the two. First up is Yu'lon versus Chi-Ji. While there are some Chi-Ji builds that can work for Raid, the current pattern that we see tends to be Yu'lon stronger in Raid and Chi-Ji stronger in keys. Yu'lon has a higher focus on casting, enveloping mist, and using hots to heal a larger raid, while Chi-Ji focuses on spreading enveloping mist to a point. Most of the healing comes from Gust of Mist procced from our damaging abilities, and tends to do better with smaller group sizes. Jade Bond versus Gift of the Celestials. Jade Bond is most often taken in Raid regardless of which Celestial you're currently using. This will give you a longer duration, but also a longer cooldown that can be reduced through Gust of Mist procs. Gift of the Celestials is a shorter duration, but a shorter cooldown, and is better in Mythic Plus due to the consistency that it allows, as well as the shorter cooldown timer that translates well for most Mythic Plus boss timers. Rushing Wind Kick and Jadefire Teachings are a choice node. Rushing Wind Kick is taken in Raid due to the increased amount of cooldown reduction for Jade Bond, as well as to maintain your Renewing Mist with an easier time on keeping uptime due to the increased range that it has. Jadefire Teachings is a talent that buffs Ancient Teachings, and it's basically a permanent choice in Mythic Plus due to how much healing it contributes. Technically you could run Rushing Wind Kick and keys, but without Jadefire Teachings, you have to spend so much more time casting due to the lack of maintenance healing that it's ultimately not worth it. The Jadefire Stomp and Awakened Jadefire nodes work extremely well with Chi-Ji, so if you're playing Chi-Ji in Raid or doing Mythic Plus, you'll likely have either one or both of these talents. But if you're playing Yu'lon, they don't provide any extra benefit, so these get dropped in favor of things like Misty Peaks, Invoker's Delight, and Mending Proliferation. And lastly, we have the Shaelin's Gift nodes. This includes the ability itself, and then Veil of Pride or Shahao's Lessons, and Legacy of Wisdom. If you're running Shaelin's Gift in Raid, you're going to use Shahao's Lessons to buff your other cooldowns and not run Legacy of Wisdom, whereas in Mythic Plus, this is designed to be an AoE heal separate from Vivify and Vivify Cleave, and it is designed for 5 targets with the Legacy of Wisdom talented. There's a few other differences, but these are the major changes between the two Mythic Plus and Raid builds. And Raid is more focused on spreading Renewing Mist and keeping your active amount of Renewing Mist high for additional Zen Pulse and Vivify healing. Most of your throughput in Raid will be from the casted spells like Enveloping Mist, Vivify, and Zen Pulse procs. You are also actively playing around the Jade Bond cooldown reduction for Yu'lon to meet your heal assignment timers. This includes Rushing Wind Kick, as it's easier to get uptime with the extended range without missing your Jadefire Teachings transfer, since you're not using many DPS abilities in Raid with Yu'lon. On the Mythic Plus side of things, our goal is to meet the heal checks and keep people healthy while also contributing a significant amount of damage. Our main source of healing in Mythic Plus should be Ancient Teachings through our many different damage sources that get converted into that healing. With Shaelin's Gift and Veil of Pride, as well as Gift of the Celestials, the Mythic Plus build has consistent cooldown timers, which is important for that form of content, and it's also built for 5-man groups, since we take Legacy of Wisdom, which makes it a 5-target heal. Ancient Teachings also gets better value due to the way that it splits evenly among injured targets. It will not have to split as much in keys as it would in Raid. When it comes to tracking buffs, there is quite the laundry list. Mistweaver has a ton of abilities and spells to keep track of, so here are the important ones. On my frames, I have all of our hots and our heal amps. I also track absorbs, but I don't specifically track Life Cocoon or Chi Cocoon, but since they are absorbs, that's how they show up, and that's how I keep track of the uptime or the absorb amount left on my party. Pretty much everything else is a weak aura that I'm using to track. I know there's a lot, but they do all play into the spec in some type of impactful way, either being a maintenance heal, defensive uptime, or something involving a cooldown's impact. I ended up with this list by looking at the build that I regularly play, which is Jadefire Stomp Mythic Plus with Master of Harmony. I didn't include a few buffs because I don't think they'd be useful for most people, but I would recommend every one of these to be tracked somewhere in your UI. I have my own setup for weak auras that I do have available to you guys on the website, which I will link in the description. If you don't like mine, there are plenty of others out there on Wago. And then just for general players, I would recommend having something like OmniCD to keep track of your group's defensives, just so you know what defensives they have and what defensives they don't have. There is a category of questions that we get a lot of the times that I can kind of sum up as HPS Yield. And this is understanding how much all of your abilities are capable of in different circumstances. Mistweaver has a lot of short cooldowns coupled with 4 heal amps available to us and some pretty decent maintenance and spot healing. All of these factor into the decision making on how many cooldowns we need to send and which ones, or if we even need to send them at all, or if maintenance healing will be enough. We also have rotations and spell prio that vary by target count and the type of damage that we're taking. It's worth noting that Mistweaver can have a degree of RNG based on a few talents, but these aren't so huge that they're something that would impact a rotation, for example. Understanding and getting the hang of this usually just comes with time and practice, as well as dungeon familiarity. So while it's rarely something that you can just read in a guide, it is important to pay attention to how much you're healing, how much you're getting out of your spells, noting things like any active amps, your target count, and the damage patterns. Outside of a guide or just general time practicing, this is probably the biggest advice that I can give to someone who's looking to get into Mistweaver. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to hit me up in the comments or while I'm live. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video.